In this lesson, we're going to continue discussing interactive. If you'd like to follow along, go under the File menu to Open, and in the Sample Files folder, scroll down to 1605 Multi-State Objects, and just click Open. What is a multi-state object? It's a single object with multiple versions, which can be accessed by a viewer using controls. Before we get started, make sure to select the Digital Publishing workspace from your workspace pop-up at the top of your document window. This has most of the panels that we're going to need for this lesson. How do we make ordinary objects into a multi-state object? Well, why don't we start by going to our Layers panel. And you can see one of the layers is called Images. And there's multiple images stacked perfectly on top of each other in that layer. And if I turn off one of the images by clicking on the visibility eye, it's kind of like the way a multi-state object works. It has multiple variations of your object, and you can turn them on and off one at a time. Let me turn them all back on. How do I make these images into a single multi-state object? The first thing I have to do is in my Images layer, click on the selection square to the right of the images listing. That will select all of the objects at once. And you can see they're all selected in the Layers panel. I'm going to close the Layers panel and open the Object States panel. And it actually tells me how to make these multiple objects into a single multi-state object. I'm going to click on the little New button down the bottom, Convert Selection to Multi-State Object, and I'm done. There's my multi-state object. I can click on State 2, and I'm seeing the second slide, and then the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. Let me go back to my first state, and I want to name my object. I'm going to call it Slides, and then I'm going to hit Return or Enter. Now I need a way to control my slideshow. I'm going to do that with buttons. So I'm going to click on the red arrow that's pointing to the right, and I'm going to make that into a forward button. I'm going to open the Buttons and Forms panel, and for the type of object, I'm going to choose Button. Now I need to set up my button. There's a normal appearance of my button, but I want people to know that it's a button when they go over the top of it. So I'm going to click the visibility of rollover to give me another appearance. And I'm going to change that appearance by going under the FX pop-up menu to Inner Shadow. That's going to make the button look inset so I know it's a button before I click. I'm just going to use the default settings for Inner Shadow and click OK. And go back to my normal state. Now we need to set up what the button is going to do. The way the button's going to work is if I click and then release the button, or on a device, tap the button, it's going to do a certain action. So I'm going to click on the little plus pop-up to add an action for this button. And what I want is go to Next State. And here I have a choice. Do I want it to stop at the last state? Or if I get to the last state and click my forward button again, it will go to the first state. So it kind of loops the states. So I'm not going to check Stop at Last State. And now I'm just going to name my button. I'm going to name it Forward and hit Enter or Return. Now I need to create a back button. So I'm going to click on the red triangle that's pointing towards the left, and for the type of object, choose Button, and go through the same things. First, I want to create another state, another appearance of my button called Rollover. I'm going to choose, like for the last button, Inner Shadow, and just use the default. So I'm going to click OK and go back to my normal state. Now it's going to work on release or tap, but I also have a choice of on click, on rollover, on roll off, and so on and so forth. I'm going to leave it on release or tap, and I'm going to add an action. So I'm going to click on the plus pop-up menu and go to Previous State. So this is going to take us back to the previous slide or previous state, and I'm going to name this button back. Let's see if it's actually going to work. To do that, I need to open another panel that's not available in digital publishing. I'm going to go into my window menu to interactive SWF preview. So this is going to give us a flash preview to see if our multi-state object is being controlled by the buttons. Let me make the panel a lot bigger. I'm going to click and drag from the lower right-hand corner of the panel. Now you can see when I go over the top of my forward button, it gets inset. If I go over my back button, it gets inset. Let me click on my forward button, and I'm going in a forward direction through my states from the multi-state object. And if I keep clicking, it's going to keep going. I can do the same thing going backwards. It's looping the states, so it just keeps going through it in either direction. It works beautifully. In the next lesson, we're going to discuss animating your layout.